What's happening, fellas? It's your boy Hardcorn, and it's a very special one this time. We're going to be going over Miss Red Hots herself, Astaroth. She's a nuclear warhead, and we're going to disassemble her down to the screws. Her stats, skills, supporters, we'll see it all. To top it all off, we'll define if she's worth buying in the first place. Before we get started, I just want to tell you guys to like and subscribe. It helps me with knowing you want more in a concrete sense, and also helps you with getting more content over time. Now let's get moving. Astaroth is one of the game's additions from Taimanin and Asagi Battle Arena. They've also managed to integrate her into the game's story, so she's managed to find her way into a playable sense. In terms of strength, she commands the fires of hell and is even with Edwin Black himself. She rules the magma planes with a strong but lackadaisical fist. Getting involved isn't her style, but when she does, it'll get a bit steamy perhaps. Her involvement with Black can be best summed up in that she's his ex, so she joins the Taimanins to get back at him in the way she knows how. Astaroth's a character I just adore, and she's got two big reasons to enjoy. Now, Action Taimanin can do characters dirty sometimes when they get added in, by making them mediocre or just plain awful. However, they didn't do that with Astaroth. They made her fantastic. She's an absolute queen, and they give her the strength to move nations. She can summon serpents, enormous pools of lava, drop explosive fireballs, and burn down all her enemies with one aggressive flamethrower. Her gameplay is similar to Emily, in the sense that you hold the attack button down and she'll constantly keep firing. This is actually how Emily normally works out without Zero System, but her flamethrower comes out as a singular beam that has short to medium range. It also fixes the camera to the enemy Astaroth is locked onto when you hold the attack down, so it can do a whole 180 if you're looking away from the enemy, then it'll flip her around and she'll look right at him and fire. It's a bit cumbersome to use, but getting acquainted with it won't take long and you'll be burning enemies to a crisp very easily. Because when she's attacking like this, it's not so much a flamethrower you spray around, it's a long-bladed chainsaw that you just grind into enemies, so you waggle her back and forth for some crispy damage tech. She's got what I see as one of the fastest dashes in the game. You can mash it out and she'll just dash forward twice with minimal delay. She can get out and away from most scenarios and reset if she needs to. It's an incredible boon when a character gets movement that is just so good. She needs this because her basic attack is nearly a second-long windup to get going, so she has to get away and make space so she can get the ball rolling. But when she gets going though, she just won't stop. Though when she gets hit, it's really rough. Her recovery animation is decades long. You get hit and you will do everything in your power to make sure it doesn't happen again. It'll get chained if you don't escape fast enough, so you get to see her daintily backflip several times in a row and just eat damage. Dodge early and often. Now her stats at 81. At the time of this, she has the highest base HP in the game. It's not even close to the previous holder. 6104 base HP and Oboro had 5764. Astaroth has some real meat on her bones and she needs it, but that's for later. With 3143 attack though, it's the lowest in the game. But with how often she attacks and how strong she can become, it really won't matter too much. I mean, the character above her is Emily in terms of attack, and Emily is this unstoppable dynamo, so stats like this aren't everything, but they do help. 4480 in defense though is quite average, so she can take a few hits and still keep going. She sits at exactly the same value as Sue at 81 for defense, so I think that's quite nice. 3356 base crit is really bad. In fact, it's the worst in the game right now. This means you're going to need to feed her as much critical boosting as possible and those critical chance ups on the Magatamas, because she has the attack speed and frequency, so they offset that by giving her bad crits. Her stats are all over the place, but it's 100% on purpose, because the skills she has need to be kept in check at the core of its being, her. With Astaroth setting red for her supporters, she gains access to her special debuff, Terrorize. It comes into play on many of her skills, which makes you apply it a lot. You want to apply it early and often because at 10 stacks of it, it makes an enemy instantly groggy. Not only that, a single stack of it applies a very strong slow as well, so you want to get it on as many enemies as possible. It's also a listed debuff, so it gets a benefit from the Suzune supporter. Now the big money, her skills. Astaroth is special in that she doesn't have the aerial ray with the helm splitter. It gets replaced with the Taimanin art. Something unprecedented like that just amazes me because it's one of two of them. It makes Astaroth's flamethrower turn into big bullets, fire faster, and increase their particle charge. This makes her into a gunner, but her damage doesn't increase. The bullets themselves have decent speed, but it doesn't change that they have to travel. Astaroth gets to play Space Invader, with you holding the button down and moving back and forth to avoid hits and just shooting bullets. But with these bullets is that they don't pierce. When one hits the enemy, that's it. You just keep firing into them while all the other enemies encroach. Astaroth's normal flamethrower pierces, so she can hit more than one enemy along the entire beam. Missing out on that puts her in unnecessary danger, and she really doesn't want to get hurt. With Serpent Rend, she gets to give herself covering fire. Covering in the sense that it protects her while she's doing her wind-up animation. The serpents fire on the first frame, and you can hold down the button so you can do stuff like fire and forget. The serpents go toward the nearest enemies, so it's a nice skill to have on the tower when you're being chased by a bunch of enemies. Serpent is also extremely fast and it will clear packs with lightning speed. When maxed out with the correct supporters, it has a 50% higher crit rate along with shooting a total of 4 fireballs. It's a lot of damage in a very short amount of time, along with a ready cooldown of 8 seconds. It's 16 regularly, but with max skill training and 1 green supporter, that's a total of 50% off, so it'll be ready on just about every encounter. So even if the group didn't die on the first series of serpents, they'll be back quickly to deal a boatload of damage. It's also the skill of choice for those going for fast clears on time attack, and fast clears to farm events. It's incredible bursting potential on a cheap setup. You don't even need all 3 greens to make it worthwhile. Just 1 green for the frequency is the real strength behind it. Phoenix Dive is one of her few melee options. Though they gave it incredible base damage, so it will just destroy whatever she makes impact to, alongside applying several effects. Green gives a 12% damage boost, blue with a burn, and red with a terrorize debuff. It's a very straightforward striking skill that is going to get used to get the ball rolling on one of those 3 effects. Green builds like taking this for the 12% attack boost, and it's also a movement option at the same time, so during time attack she can keep herself mobile and deal incredible damage. It makes Serpent Blades really strong too. Blue's burn isn't too much of a game changer, but it is a debuff and works well with the Micah supporter. Though it is a burn that deals 60% of its damage to the victim, so it's a strong one for sure. 1 stack of Terrorize may not be worth taking on red since there's a faster and more effective options to apply that debuff, though it could see use on applying a very strong slow to a dangerous enemy, which is valuable in its own sense. Satellite Flare is one of her extreme dodge skills. On usage, she spawns 3 fireballs that orbit her, and when it's active it gives her increased range defense, and on contact the orbs do damage. On green, this is her only source of healing. A whole 2% is not very good, alongside that the skill itself has very low base damage. Then you can go equip some blues and make this do 150% more damage. Even at that point, you can't heal and the damage is still so low, you won't be getting anything meaningful out of this. Red isn't even that much better, since it gives her an all damage mitigation of 25% for 10 seconds. This sort of setup may be good in the leveling phase when you don't do a lot of damage, but things hurt really hard. It's not worth taking as Astaroth ramps up really fast, so it won't matter after a certain point. Satellite Flare is just underwhelming as it gets, and you have to be within punching distance of enemies to make it worthwhile. Obviously, since it's a melee range contingency on extreme dodge, it's for when enemies get in too close and she can cover her escape. This though could have done with having a slow on impact to aid that escape, but that's something her other dodge skill takes care of. Hellblaze is what I'd call her signature skill. She can control the fires of hell, and she exudes this power by dropping a whole lake of fire at someone's feet. I'd put this skill up there with Serpent Blaze in terms of use. However, Astaroth is fixed during the whole casting of the skill, but it's big enough to make it worthwhile, because she has super armor during the entire casting of this skill. So even standing in those big red impact markers won't interrupt the skill. It's her longest skill cooldown at 22 seconds, so it pays to know where to use it to make it the most effective. The casting animation takes a long time too, and the cast itself is pointed at whoever she targets, so it is possible to miss with this skill. It's her big time triple red skill and comes with everything you need to incinerate everything. Inflicts Terrorize on every hit, increases the size of the lake by 60%, and a whopping 250% increase to critical damage. So not only can she inflict Terrorize quickly on enemies, she can do it to many enemies at once. Earlier I remarked that it takes 10 applications of Terrorize to make an enemy instantly groggy. Hellblaze deals exactly 10 hits. If they don't have armor bars or it's depleted, they will not escape this lake. This has such high base damage along with the crit boosting that most things do not survive the entire duration. I wish it could inflict burn, but there's other ways to accomplish it. A small complaint for such a big, successful skill. Fire Wave is her second Taimanin art. It enhances her basic flamethrower by making it do much more damage, give it more particle charge, and give it much longer range. It also retains the piercing property as well. It is wholeheartedly an upgrade to her basic attack, and there's not much of a reason to take it over the other Taimanin art. The piercing property is an aspect that doesn't get mentioned too much. Most characters in the game have wide slashing attacks that may hit one or two enemies behind another. Astaroth essentially fires a fixed ray that goes through any enemy. A typical flamethrower loses the brunt of its attack on the first impact, and any leftovers try to flow around and above the impact. Astaroth's being more or less a laser chainsaw makes her different than what we typically understand as a flamethrower. Chainsaws have their chain go completely around the bar and can cut on the sides as well as the front. With this, she can scroll across the screen and hit just about everyone while staying far away. The damage boost helping out her middling basic attack just makes this the Taimanin art to take. It's just vastly superior. Prominence is her counterattack. On one very low cooldown, she'll get to use this very often. However, it's not exactly an attack to take. Here's the thing about it. Astaroth's recovery animation from taking a hit is very long. Prominence allows her to get out of it. However, Prominence essentially extends her recovery, but without the invincibility. She has to do the Fire Blast animation, but she can still take damage during this. What they do to make this work is that the attack knocks down on hit. However, it only attacks in front of her. If someone comes in from the side, she'll just eat a hit and get back into the recovery, and she can't activate Prominence for another few seconds. She'd end up taking more damage than if she just let the animation play out and dodge away. The effects though are somewhat worthwhile. Green giving instant groggy, but of course doesn't work on enemies that have armor bars left over, doesn't make it too hot. Blue giving an attack down to those affected is nice since it can mitigate damage taken. Red's being this enormous 30% defense down on impact makes it almost worthwhile to take damage. It's not exactly her finest skill, but it's good filler and protection. Flame Haze is her gap closer. For a character who has to stay out of melee range to do her basic attack, it's the antithesis of her setup, though it does have its use. One being that it can get her in close, destroy as much armor as possible, and possibly lead into one of her long cast attacks like Supernova or Hellblaze. The attack itself is like Asagi's in that she'll teleport to the enemy but always face their back. That's awesome to catch an enemy off guard, but as soon as the hit makes impact, the enemy is turned around to face her. A little counterintuitive, but if it's used in a red build, it inflicts Terrorize and slows them down. This isn't some tiny blast in front of her either. She can catch several enemies at once with this, so it can apply Terrorize to more than just the main target. It doesn't have just use in red though. Green gives her a defense buff that sadly only lasts 5 seconds. Though with the short cooldown of this skill, she can definitely keep the buff going if she needs to. Blue has this skill dealing 25% more damage with no other effects. Flat damage is alright, but I'd take the other two colors giving a useful buff or debuff. No reason to take it on blue when you can just go take the other gap closer, Phoenix Dive, and deal a burn to the target. I wouldn't take Flame Haze on the tower though, since bosses there love to ignore crowd control, and jumping right in front of them is a good way to suddenly take 8,000 damage. It's good everywhere else and with any other color than blue. Supernova is Rinko's meteor, flat out. However, it's put onto an Astaroth twist. It initially deals area damage and only gets bigger in the set, and it deals burn damage. 40% burn damage that is, and I've gotten this thing to deal 400,000 damage, so if something survives, it's got a huge dot stuck to it for at least 4 ticks. It's got less of a cooldown compared to something like Hellblaze, 18 compared to Blaze's 22. With that you'll see it more often and possibly get more out of it. Thing is, you can actually get a weapon for Astaroth that drops an unupgraded version of Supernova, so you can start spamming these fireballs and burst like crazy. Supernova also gets armor on its entire casting, so Astaroth can't be knocked out of this. This is something Rinko doesn't have, but Rinko can also cast it within like half a second, while Astaroth has to do all her pomp and circumstance to make a big nuke, but it's still so very much worth it. Her 81 skill is Lava Servant. It's one of the game's familiar skills, so it gets boosts from supporters that affect it. It takes 3 of a color to get anything out of it, but those effects are worth the cost. With 3 you can summon 2 familiars. 3 greens gives a very nice slow. Since mono green can't inflict the slow outside of supporters, this is welcome to keep the heat off of her. 3 blues just makes them deal more damage, and then 3 reds just increases their duration. This is also her other extreme dodge skill, and it's much better than the other one. She doesn't have to get in close and it attacks for her. Their damage isn't much to write home about, but the slow that green gives makes it worthwhile. Supporters are all over the place with Astaroth. She can take on many builds due to her versatility. She wants to hold down the attack button and keep melting face, so you just feed her whatever strongest supporters you have, and her skills and basic attack will do everything. That's more of an unrefined approach to look at her, but it's doable with her since she is just so incredibly strong. Now let's go green. Astaroth is a real environmentalist with her ability to cause fast-spreading forest fires in the form of her Serpent Blaze ability. Green is a more technical series when it comes to her skills. This is due to it having buffs, groggy, HP restoration, and more. You can cover your bases while also dealing really great damage. Serpent Blaze at full green comes in with a 50% boost to crit chance on the skill, so it pays to start stacking crit damage in things like Suruga or Kaoru. Phoenix Dive having the attack boost makes her crit harder inadvertently too. For longer missions, it could even pay to use something like Yuri Hisui's Call, since Astaroth can rack up a ton of hits over time, alongside her Lava Servants keeping the hit count up when she's recovering, or away from the enemy that's far away. Not as quickly as Emily, but still quick enough to make it worth taking. The Demonologist Emily supporter is good for fire and forget, as Astaroth just keeps attacking and it shoots homing balls. Good for cleaning up if Serpent Blaze didn't get them the first time. It's rare that it won't, but it can't hurt to have a backup. And really, just about every green can find a home with Astaroth, except for some of the melee supporters. Because if you're just maining Phoenix Dive, you're not going to get anything done. Blue is a special case. Astaroth's skills in blue deal burn, decrease enemy damage, or increase the skill's raw damage. This is actually quite welcome, since blue's main attribute is being more of a defensive ploy, sacrificing damage for safety. Making up or just alleviating that aspect helps maintain her strength. With her already low attack stats, she needs help wherever to get it up. However, there are some damage boosting supporters in blue, alongside some debuffers to sort of even the odds in terms of attack. Phoenix Dive and Supernova inflict a burn-on impact to enemies that survive, so that plays into Micah very well as her supporter has increased skill damage to debuff enemies. If you can get Furfur or Hebiko, they give increased damage to demon enemies. A welcome sight in blue where buffs like that are barren. Noah's supporter can also heal and inflict a debuff as well, a good combination for Astaroth to have. But in blue, there are many supporters that can give Astaroth a percent defense buff against specific types of enemies or damage. They're all really good, even the SR ones. A special mention to Kuromachi Kato for the synergy with Noah alongside the consistent snaring. Alongside that, the big series of buffs are against those who are snared. Really great for Astaroth, since she can slink on in there and drop a supernova without people walking out of it. Or get the whole casting of Starlight Navigator in. Starlight Navigator also has the damage taken from demons reduction on it inherently, so by itself it has the strength of some supporters. Blue just wants to burst, so she can accomplish this with calls or effects that hold people in place, slow or stun them. It is not the strongest build for sure, but it sure can handle some intense pressure. Red is where she really shines though. It's all about her inflicting terrorized stacks to prepare for the unleashing of Hellblaze. Everything there is to supplement it getting it off. Satellite on activation gives a defense buff to protect her from damage during Blaze's cast. Prominence giving a huge defense down to enemies in front of her, making the hits on Hellblaze that much harder. While Astaroth is getting set up, she needs to use her basic flamethrower. This counts as a ranged option, so her taking the ranged attack boosting supporters is an instant pick. You can't go wrong with those, and it jacks up her damage something fierce. Most of her options are ranged too, so they get an immediate benefit out of it. Yamato Suzune giving an enormous 40% attack buff against debuffed enemies is really strong in Astaroth's red, alongside the immense damage of Hellblaze and the many ways for Astaroth to inflict ailments. She can really tear heads off with this supporter. Astaroth is also a demon type, so she gets really good use out of Shirayuki. It's a flat damage boost just from her being a certain type, which makes all of her moves that much stronger. Ingrid is also a really good pick on Astaroth, since Ingrid gives such a huge boost to particles, and it allows her to spam Starlight Navigator or the crit boost on the Rebellion weapon. Red is also home to some of the game's best SR supporters. Faust raises ranged critical chance, and Ibuki ranges ranged critical damage. Picking up either one or both will end up being a DPS increase, even in spite of their weaker stats. Sonata Homura gives a 30% damage boost against all enemies, but you take 10% more damage. A worthwhile choice to make Astaroth go even harder. And good filler until you get other strong UR supporters. The fun doesn't stop there, in that even in R there's a red colored defense up against Demon supporter, along with a red colored particle charge gain supporter. This is also the home to Spica, which means Astaroth can get invincibility that can actually support her set. Astaroth has it all in red and there's no real bad choice inside it. You could give her anything just like in green. Let's finish up. Astaroth is incredibly strong. One of the strongest in the game perhaps. She can do nearly everything well, and even when she's not excelling at something, she's able to do just fine at it. Also, it doesn't take a lot of investment to get her this way. Best way to see her is an exponential growth curve. She starts really poor, but as her offensive capability increases, she rides high on the damage curve and only continues to get stronger and stronger. Pretty much from struggling to take down regular mooks, to one-shotting them and two-shotting bigger enemies somewhere around level 50. That's where I consider the offensive break point, to where she goes from bad to good. She's one of those the best defense is a good offense type of characters. This is due to her healing being so poor, alongside her lacking defensive options. Though her offensive options are extremely strong, so she doesn't have to worry about them when they're all gone. One may point out that she may not be good for longer fights since she lacks a healing, and that is correct to a degree. She rewards good positioning and attentiveness to surroundings to mitigate her poor defensive options and also survive in longer fights. Many have taken her to the tower with great success, so she's not going to crack under pressure. She's bulky as all get out too, so she can be much more risky. Alongside that, she has some of the best dashes in the game, so she can get in and get out even after sustaining damage. The question remains though, should you spend those gems on her? 100% yes. She's a sort of acquisition you should get early, like Emily. The immense strength and versatility puts her up there at the top with some of the game's finest. Not too much into the technical side? That's alright. She's as top heavy as it gets, and combined with the fact that she's a short stack, so what she has there looks just that much bigger. She's sweet and spicy like cinnamon candy with all the power of a nuclear warhead. Astaroth, the full package. Oh lord, it wasn't that something. Thanks for coming on out and learning with your boy Hardcorn. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Leave a comment too, because I'd love to hear from you guys and maybe get some ideas from where to go next. And as always, I'll see you next time.